With us now, NBC's Vaughn Hilliard in West Palm Beach, Florida. Jacqueline Alemany, congressional investigations reporter for The Washington Post. Victoria de Francesco Soto, dean of the Clinton School of Public Service at the University of Arkansas and an MSNBC contributor. And Matthew Dowd, chief strategist for the 2004 Bush-Cheney campaign and a senior MSNBC political analyst. So, Vaughn, the president-elect said last week that investments of $1 billion or more would be fast-tracked into the United States. Is SoftBank essentially the first company reacting to that?
Right. This is notable because this is the first really kind of Donald Trump hosted event that he has held since his election victory more than a month ago. And Masa-san is the billionaire Japanese investor who 8 years ago, we should note in 2016, during Donald Trump's transition, held a similar type of event as this, but at Trump Tower, announcing $50 billion investment in U.S. technology. And this go around, he is making the commitment to invest at $100 billion towards AI-specific and other technology investments. And it's not clear exactly where these investments will go, but he does run what amounts to the largest private equity firm invested in technology-specific ventures. And so for Donald Trump, he has somebody here who is coming into the United States and has been a committed partner to his over the last years and says that he will continue to invest in U.S. groups. And so for Donald Trump having this sort of an investment, we saw these sort of events during his first administration, is a way for him to kick off by suggesting that not just U.S. billionaires and investors are willing to put money into U.S. investments, but also overseas investors are willing to come to the United States for growth and development. Jose.
Matthew, I mean, how unusual is it for a president-elect to announce executive decisions and proposals like this before Inauguration Day?
It's highly unusual, but as you know, and we all know on this panel, we've gotten very used to Donald Trump not following any sort of usual pattern on just about everything, and from his picks to head cabinets to all the things he does as president, before president, after president. It's very unusual. What I find, I don't know what the right word is, ironic or fascinating, is that he's announcing this as a big coup that this Japanese investor is putting $100 billion in the U.S. It kind of underlying that says the U.S. economy is doing great and is robust in order to attract $100 billion, which kind of is inconsistent with Donald Trump's statement that is that the U.S. economy is in shambles and it's a wreck and it's the worst ever and he's going to come in. Well, it seems the U.S. economy is doing pretty well to have a $100 billion investment announcement.
Yeah, I mean, Jackie, meanwhile, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is on Capitol Hill this week, where he is expected to face a lot of questions about his skepticism of vaccines and vaccine mandates. The New York Times reports a Kennedy attorney who has been helping him review candidates for top health roles took part in a 2022 effort to petition the government to revoke approval of the polio vaccine. Now, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell wrote in part, quote, efforts to undermine public confidence in proven cures are not just uninformed, they're dangerous. How much of a hurdle is this for Kennedy?
Yeah, Jose, this is one of the nominees that Trump has chosen so far that might encounter the most resistance on Capitol Hill. It's not just people like Mitch McConnell, who has been really at the forefront of his criticisms of RFK because of his personal experience, but there are others that we've heard who have low-lying levels of concern about RFK's prolonged push to undermine public confidence in vaccinations. The Trump campaign, though, has gone out of their way to say that this is not going to be a priority of a Trump administration. Trump said that on Friday in his Time magazine interview, where he defended the polio vaccine specifically, but did leave the door open to the review of other vaccinations. But we'll see how RFK's meetings go this week. But he is going to meet a fair amount of skepticism, and not just for his views on vaccinations, but other ideological differences that he has with Republican senators for some of his views on abortion. So there's going to be a laundry list of items he's going to have to go through, and his public confirmation hearing is going to be, I think, one to watch.
Yeah, and Vaughn, meanwhile, let's turn to Pete Hegseth, Trump's pick for defense secretary. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham said yesterday that Hegseth told him he would release the person who accused him of sexual misconduct from her non-disclosure agreement. Take a listen.
He told me he would release her from that agreement. Yeah, I mean, just think about what we're talking about. I'd want to know if anybody nominated for a high-level job in Washington legitimately assaulted somebody. If people have an allegation to make, come forward and make it. Like they did in Kavanaugh, we'll decide whether or not it's credible. Right now, he's being tried by anonymous sources. That will not stand.
Vaughn, meanwhile, the president-elect continues to show his support for Hegseth, right?
Exactly. Pete Hegseth was at the Army-Navy game this weekend with the president-elect. And for Donald Trump, he has made a commitment and stood by his nominees, Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., despite their uphill obstacles that they're expected to face here once he is officially inaugurated and those confirmation proceedings begin. But in the case of Pete Hegseth, this is notable because, well, on one hand, he has privately suggested to the likes of Lindsey Graham and others that he would be willing to essentially null that non-disclosure agreement with the woman who alleged sexual assault by him. But at the same time, Pete Hegseth's attorney, Tim Barlatore, for now several weeks, has publicly threatened to sue this woman for defamation if she were to make any alleged defamatory statements about Pete Hegseth. And of course, their versions of events run counter to one another. And so on one hand, he is suggesting that he'd be fine with her coming and putting her name and story out publicly, even before the U.S. Senate on the national airwaves. At the same time, his attorney has publicly suggested that they would be willing to file a lawsuit against her, which, of course, her name has been private here from that settlement that they struck in the aftermath of that sexual assault allegation in the police report that was filed.
I mean, Victoria, what position is Hegseth in today vis-a-vis 2 weeks ago?
Well, in terms of Trump support, President-elect Trump is going to be with Hegseth until he's not. And I think we saw that with Matt Gaetz. Right now, at this moment, he is fully behind him. I think in the next week or so, depending on if this information about the woman comes out, and folks like Lindsey Graham could say, well, you know what, I don't have enough information, maybe I'll pull back. Then in that case, you might see a Matt Gaetz all over again. But there's going to have to be a tipping point. And like we have seen with Trump, he is all or none. So right now he's in the all category. But let's not be surprised if suddenly he retracts within the next couple of days or even within the next couple of weeks.
Jackie, Hegseth seems to be, at least today, in a better position politically than he was 2 weeks ago. But as Victoria was saying, this could all change in a moment.
It's very true. And that's why you hear Republican senators keep calling for FBI background checks. At the end of the day, that's what this will come down to, whether or not something pops up that hasn't been publicly revealed so far, or if any of Hegseth's accusers or these anonymous sources come on the record and decide to testify as a part of these public hearings. That is what ultimately could sway whether or not he gets confirmed. But, you know, right now, in terms of the position that Hegseth is currently in, Trump's transition officials feel like they've sort of crossed the Rubicon and that they've been able to rehab his standing on Capitol Hill through his meetings and defenses and reactions to these allegations that have been made in recent weeks. They so far he's gotten at least one lawmaker, Joni Ernst, to actually come back from her public criticisms and her seeming opposition to Hegseth. And she's someone who the transition was really putting lots of public pressure on. And senators have gotten the message that that is what could happen to them, too, if they come out against any more of these potential nominees publicly before there's anything that else that comes out that could be, again, a negative determinant of what happens during these confirmation hearings.
And Matthew, meanwhile, on another issue, here's what Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders had to say about the possibility of President Biden issuing preemptive pardons for members of the House January 6th committee who President-elect Trump has in the past threatened.
I think he might want to consider that very seriously. Look, that is an outrageous statement. This is what authoritarianism is all about. It's what dictatorship is all about. You do not arrest elected officials who disagree with you, who undertake an investigation.
You know, Donald Trump's been claiming for years that his cases are politically motivated. If the president issues preemptive pardons, what precedent do you think that would set?
An awful one. I mean, I think this is a bad message that it sends. I thought the clemency that he did, the pardon on his son, was a bad message for many different reasons. I think people that fight against authoritarian regimes and fight against autocracy or fight against bad policy like the civil rights movement understand that they could be, something could happen to them but part of the moral high ground is you don't remove yourself from that or don't sort of put up a wall on that. I think the presidential pardon in total needs to be reexamined. It's way too broad, it's way too contingent upon what one person thinks in this. And I actually think it hurts the Democrats if he does this, because it takes away any moral high ground they may have about accusing Donald Trump. Because if on day one he releases or he pardons 1,200 people, then it gets all thrown in this mix of, well, everybody does it, so what's the problem in this? I think it's a horrible precedent.